Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this is the Nothing Phone 2. And I'll be straight up with you, I reckon they've knocked out the park with this. Solid specs, good battery life, fantastic cameras for the price, and they've refined this design, with the updated glyph interface being as eye-catching as ever. Now, I do understand why some people may think this is a bit of a gimmick. I mean, it's just flashy lights on the back of your phone, and of course you shouldn't buy it just for the glyphs, but I reckon in a world of copy and paste Android phones, where the only visual differentiation comes from the color or the pattern we get on the back, I think this cleverly blends form and function, with lighting for notifications, timers, volume, and you can even now compose your own ringtone light show. And actually, if I put them side by side, the Phone 1 and the Phone 2 with their glyph fill light enabled, hopefully you can see the difference there in the brightness. But flashy lights aside, I reckon the best bit about this is the price. The Nothing Phone 2 starts at £579 here in the UK and $599 in the US, because yes, this is officially getting a US and also a Canadian launch among other countries, which is great for my American friends. Although, for an extra £100, you could bag yourself a OnePlus 11, which is a slightly more flagship phone in terms of specs. I might have to do a comparison between these two, but it is interesting that obviously Carl Pei, the founder of Nothing, one of the founders, came from OnePlus. He was one of the founders of that as well, and lots of the engineers and employees have jumped ship over the last couple of years. So this rivalry is definitely heating up. So the Nothing Phone 2 is more expensive than the Phone 1, but it's also bigger and better in nearly every way. Credit to the team, they've clearly listened to a lot of the feedback from their first outing last year with the Phone 1, which you can still buy as a cheaper option if you want a more mid-range phone, and I am pleased to say it will be getting many of the new software features being introduced on the Phone 2. Now at first glance, aside from, well, the color, this is black, this is dark gray, there isn't a significant difference in the design between these two. This is definitely more of a refinement. But the headline upgrades include this bigger 6.7-inch display, which is also brighter, now peaking at 1600 nits. It's also more efficient as it now uses an LTPO panel, so the refresh can go between 1 and 120 Hz, so that should help save some battery. And while we have them side by side, you can see that despite the bigger screen, it's actually kind of surprising how the Phone 2 doesn't really look or feel much bigger at all. The Phone 2 now boasts this slightly curved, or what they call pillowed glass back, but it does help the phone look and feel a little bit more premium. And you can also see they've moved the selfie camera from a corner hole punch to the center. It also comes in this dark grey rather than black color now, as well as white, although for me I do like the darker option as I think it makes the glyph lighting just pop a little bit more, and it gives it a little bit more of an understated look. We have recycled aluminium for the frame, Gorilla Glass front and back, and the Phone 2 is now IP54 rated, so a touch more water resistant than the Phone 1's IP53 rating, although still no headphone jack, no microSD card, and bizarrely the Phone 2 also doesn't support any kind of eSIM. So there's nothing drastically different on the outside. The big upgrades with the Phone 2 are on the inside, with the processor, the battery, and the camera. The Phone 2 boasts a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip, so it's not quite the flagship Gen 2, but I think that was a sensible decision to keep costs down, because this is already a massive step up over the 778G Plus in the Phone 1. They've also been able to squeeze in a bigger battery, 4700 mAh versus 45 last year. However, I have found the battery on the Phone 2 to be a little bit shorter than the Phone 1. I guess despite the bigger battery, the larger screen and the much more power-hungry chip takes a bit of a toll. For example, an hour of YouTube used 4% on the Phone 1 and 7% on the Phone 2, so I'm getting about an hour less overall. But the Phone 2 still easily lasts me a full day. I'm looking at about 7.5 hours of screen on time, although of course your mileage may vary. And also I've only had this for like 10 days or so, so generally, as you know with Android phones, the more you use it, the more it sort of understands your pattern of use. And so while it's not necessarily class-leading battery life, it is still very good. It also supports up to 45 watts of wired charging, 15 watt wireless, and 5 watt reverse charging. And plugged in, 0 to 100 will take you around 55 minutes. Although, look at this. Tell me this isn't the best part of the whole phone. Nothing bundled this new transparent USB-C cable in the box. I mean, it doesn't do anything different, but why not? And I think considering we're only on their second generation of hardware, it's good to see there's already this shared design aesthetic among all their products. Now I know the cable is pretty exciting, but in all seriousness, what I've come away most impressed by with the Phone 2 is this camera. Initially I was a little bit skeptical that perhaps it wasn't going to be a huge upgrade over the Phone 1, but after taking these guys out side by side and doing a few comparison shots, It's a pretty night and day difference, particularly for the selfie. So let's see if you can tell the difference, starting with this little blind side by side. Both phones have been updated to their latest software. No edits or filters, these photos are just straight out of the phone. Can you see much of a difference, much of an upgrade? And then if we switch to the selfie camera, I reckon you're probably going to be able to tell which is the new one here. So if you guessed the phone 2 was on the right, you'd be right. So from a hardware perspective, as you can see, it is still a dual camera setup, no dedicated telephoto lens, unfortunately, but with the phone 2, we have a 50 megapixel wide, which now uses an IMX890 sensor, up from the 766 last year, although the 50 megapixel ultra wide, which also doubles as a macro, does use the same Samsung JN1 sensor as before. Nothing have also improved the 2x super res zoom, but essentially instead of pixel binning, it just uses a crop of that main 50 megapixel camera for an almost lossless 2x zoom. Although weirdly, when it comes to portrait modes, you don't have that 2x option. You can't even pinch into zoom, which is a bit frustrating because I do kind of like a more zoomed in field of view, that focal length. You can adjust the aperture going between 0.95 if you want that proper cardboard cutout look. I like it somewhere in the middle around f4. And then up front, the selfie camera has also received some much needed love, now with a 32 megapixel resolution, up from 16, and also a better IMX615 sensor, up from the 471 last year. So the camera hardware has definitely improved, but it's just as much of the software, the magic behind the scenes, the processing that's made the difference. With the more advanced ISP and the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip, which they say captures 4,000 times more data than the Phone 1. Also, the HDR algorithm now captures 8 different exposures, previously it was 3 before merging them together. So new sensors, better HDR, reduced shutter lag and motion blur for photos and videos, and while the ultra-wide hasn't changed significantly, it does benefit from the better HDR processing, and also both cameras get new lenticular filters for the lenses. It doesn't quite compete with the flagships out there like the Pixel 7 Pro, S23 Ultra, iPhone 14 Pro, but I think for the price, what you get out of this is actually very impressive.
I'm actually shooting this on the Nothing Phone 2, and it's in 4K 60 for the first time. Last year's Phone 1 was capped at 4K 30, as was the selfie camera at 1080p 30. They both had a bump up to 60 FPS, which is very nice, although frustrating, this selfie camera is still limited to 1080p. No 4K selfie yet. Oh, that is very bright. What I have noticed though, as I'm walking down my high street here, is that the OIS and the EIS stabilization is actually really good, even shooting at this 4K 60 resolution. And then we have selfie video. I'm shooting this at 1080p 30, just walking along at arm's length. Let me know what you think of the quality, and also the microphone. We've got some construction over there, a bit of wind noise. For you film nerds, by the way, if you've ever seen Hot Fuzz, the sort of spiritual sequel to Shaun of the Dead, this is the church where they push the, the steeple thing off, and it comes down and kills the guy in a horrible way. Pretty famous.
They have also added an action mode, and you can probably guess what that's supposed to do. And here it's cropping into 1080p, but to my eye, it looks like the regular 4K 60 video looks smoother. I definitely did toggle it on in the camera settings, but yeah, there you go. And finally, let's talk about the software, which I have to say is one of the highlights of this whole thing, because usually with Android phones, I just say, oh, it's running Android 13, we've got so-and-so's skin on top, and it's pretty fast and it adds a couple of things. But this is the first time outside of, say, a foldable or flipping phone, that I've actually had a lot of fun just exploring and experimenting with the software. And Nothing, despite only being a few years old, have come up with some really smart features that I just haven't seen before. Obviously, we have all the glyph stuff, and I could spend hours messing around with the Composer, but I think this is one of my favorite software features. You can add shortcuts that you'd normally have to unlock the phone, swipe down for the notification bar, and then press straight to the lock screen, one tap. Why haven't we thought of that before? There are also more Nothing designed widgets, and you can actually make widgets for all the quick setting functions, so easy toggles rather than having to swipe down first. And I can even control my Tesla. Please ignore that name, it is a joke. I have a running thing where I just have to pick the poshest name that starts with T for a Tesla. But there's just so many handy shortcuts, and there's also a ton of customization. And most importantly, it still feels just as fast as a stock Android Pixel. Also, doubling down on Nothing's kind of retro futuristic dot matrix aesthetic, you can now go full monochrome, which is pretty striking. Although I found it can make finding apps a little bit trickier. Turns out green Spotify and red YouTube icons do help you navigate. I'm also pleased to see that Nothing do offer 3 years of full Android updates with the Phone 2, and that's about on par with the competition. Samsung do offer 4 years, iPhone is a little bit longer, but I think for a relatively new company, 3 years of full updates plus a 4th security is pretty good. So let's wrap up, and given this is only their second phone ever, although I do know they've had a lot of experience making OnePlus phones in the past, I reckon for £579 or $599, the Nothing Phone 2 is my new favorite phone at this sort of upper mid-range price point. And I think for a lot of consumers who perhaps don't care that much about tech specs and maybe will just default to an iPhone, they may turn their heads and look at a Nothing Android phone just because it is something a little bit different and it is kind of cool. I highly recommend it. So if you do want to check this out, I'll leave a link in the description below. Let me know what you make of the Nothing Phone 2, and do you like this glyph lighting stuff, or do you think it's just a bit of a gimmick and a waste of time? And would you be tempted to buy a Phone 2? Let me know what you make of this in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up and a subscribe would be fantastic, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.